Hi, my name is Lata Poonamallee, and I'm here with my colleague Carter Christian, both of us from the New School. And we are very happy to share our learnings from a new course that we created, which is Mindfulness and Contemplative Engagement to support interdisciplinary collaboration. And it was an interesting experience to also teach it completely online. And both of us have different levels of online experience. I have had online education experience for a long time from 2007, having seen the way that online has evolved over time to be more effective and high touch. And
Yeah,
Carter?
yeah, and my online experience, I probably like many of you, was forced to learn how to become a remote teacher back in March of 2020. So I have much less experience in this modality.
Yeah, so with this course and the entire project is an offshoot of a university-wide interdisciplinary scholarship and teaching approach at the New School. And so Carter and I are one of the 9 university fellows that were selected to develop a kind of an infrastructure and also experience of doing interdisciplinary work. And Karan and I come from different disciplines. He's from design, and I'm from organizational behavior management and leadership for social justice. And so this, but we've spent quite a bit of time because of this fellowship that we have been meeting consistently every week for like, I don't know, over a year or 18 months. And so we've learned a lot about how to do this interdisciplinary work. And it's part of a prototype of a larger agenda to bring interdisciplinary mindfulness infrastructure to the New School. And interdisciplinarity is very critical to solving grand challenges and big problems. Like as we all know, that architects have to work with engineers, and engineers and scientists have to work with marketing people or designers, and so it's very essential skill. And several professional associations and academies like Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, and NIH have all insisted, and I've seen some work in architecture journals also, and kind of talking about the importance and criticality of interdisciplinary education. And so, so we looked at a couple of these. I think literature talks about 2 important barriers to interdisciplinary learning and teaching within academic context and work context. One is the disciplinary egocentrism, which is kind of similar to individual or personal egocentrism, where a person thinks that they know everything and they cannot really see other perspectives. Similarly, our disciplinary background and grounding and education kind of also is a blinder, that we start looking at the world only through that lens, and that comes in the way of being open to other perspectives and other disciplines. And in terms of teaching interdisciplinary work, and a lot of business schools and engineering schools and other professional schools like design have done this in the form of teamwork, which is like basically a division of labor, not necessarily enforcing or even developing reliable outputs that are an interdisciplinary outcomes from engagement and collaboration. And so these are like 2 barriers that we have seen in terms of the interdisciplinary learning.
And what we hope for is that by engaging with mindfulness and contemplative practices, that some of those barriers to interdisciplinary work can be overcome. So the terminology around mindfulness and contemplative practice can sometimes be confusing. It's also been adopted in lots of secular ways, hybridized, corporatized in different venues. And so for the purpose of this presentation and our ongoing work and research, we define secular mindfulness as the non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, accessible to anyone theoretically at any time. Contemplative engagement or contemplative practices are the attunement of mindfulness through different types of practices towards specific concepts. So for instance, in one of our classes, contemplative engagement encouraged students to consider their interconnectedness to nature and other living things through mindfulness-based activities such as meditation, free writing, and mindful walking. Over the last couple of decades, we've seen mindfulness practice and research intersect a lot across multiple disciplines. So these tools and practices have been incorporated into psychology, design practice, education, leadership development, neuroscience, and medicine, and more. And in developing this interdisciplinary class, we are particularly interested in exploring this range of applications. I'd also add that there is something that was a benefit of mindfulness practice during this very uncertain time was a sense of resiliency and a reduction in stress. And that was noted by a few of the students in the course evaluations, that the timing of the class felt consistent with their need for some of these practices to help manage what was a really challenging, and continues to be to some degree, a very challenging time to navigate. Research has also revealed some of the benefits of mindfulness practice, including things like attention regulation, reduction of stress, and increase in pro-social behavior and inquiry. And in our interdisciplinarity that we're interested in, we're particularly focused on this pro-social orientation as a way for people to move beyond the personal and disciplinary egocentrism, which Lata has described previously. So this characteristic of moving out of that egocentric perspective is necessary for interdisciplinary engagement. It's our hope that through mindfulness practice, there's an opportunity to develop a transformative understanding of others' perspectives, values, experiences, beliefs that can ultimately inform actions that serve a greater collective good. All of this led to a class that we developed, which leveraged our own personal experience and scholarly experience and research to introduce students to a range of contemplative practices across disciplines, and how those practices might intersect with particular outcomes such as creativity and social and environmental justice. Latha and my distinct expertise in leadership and management and design practice and education, respectively. And our collaboration in developing this course models the sort of interdisciplinarity we had hoped to encourage in our students. For the fall 2020 semester, we jointly developed and co-taught the class, which was already planned to be online, with an in-person retreat that had to be shifted to a 100% remote modality, creating some interesting opportunities and challenges in the class. Lata will go into a little more detail about the makeup of the class participants.
Because we were looking at the class as an experiment in working across different boundaries and divides, we opened the class to a range of students. So we had 21 students in all, and out of which 12 were undergraduate students from a variety of majors, as you can see, and 6 were master's students, again, from both design and what we categorize as non-design, like media and management. And we had 4 PhD students who came from clinical psychology. With the class organization, the course was fully online, originally planned as a hybrid class with a fully online asynchronous component and a 2 days in-person synchronous in-person retreat. However, because of the pandemic, we had to switch the 2-day synchronous retreat into an online mode. And out of the 7 weeks, 6 weeks were in different topics, which were like each had a different theme. And I taught mindfulness and social justice, mindfulness and natural environment, and mindfulness and leadership. And I'm going to let Carter talk about his modules.
Yeah, likewise, I directed the modules that were most connected with my professional and academic experience, related to things such as place attachment and awe, mindfulness and creativity, and mindfulness and a design process. With each one of the weeks, we were thoughtful in making sure that there was some consistency, that students knew what to expect by having a certain amount of consistent assignments and lectures that they could count on. So in other words, each week we had a pre-recorded welcome video, pre-recorded lectures and interviews that were quite short, topic-related readings, contemplative practice exercises, usually at least one, sometimes more than one, and then 2 class discussion boards where students could reflect upon the exercises and the readings, as well as a reflective journal that allowed students to respond to how the topic and theme resonated with their own personal, professional, and academic experience. All of this was complemented with the 2-day retreat, which was originally supposed to be in person, which of course, due to the pandemic, had to move fully remote.
And so with the design was supposed to be in-person retreat, but we had to move it online. And given the timing, it was like September 2020, everybody was zoomed out. So Carter and I were particularly kind of drawing on our own experience of having been in the Zoom world. And so designed the retreat in a way that allowed cultivating the sense of community, emotional and psychological safety, where people can actually share. And because it's not a content oriented retreat, it's a process oriented retreat. And so which meant like people should be willing and feel safe to engage in the immersive experience. So first thing we did was we cut down an 8-hour day into a 4 or 5-hour days so that they're not in front of the computer a lot. And we also created like a more spacious transition so that they didn't feel like pressured. And we allowed them, for instance, like to turn off the camera during one of the mindfulness practice, because they did not have the same kind of safety or security of being a group practice in a physical context where they have a lot more information, like nonverbal information, and just this shared experience of being in the same space, engaging in the same practice. And so we also brought in, like, as you can see, we used the Zoom breakout rooms to create more of an intimacy in small groups and in dyadic interpersonal spaces. We also built in journaling and reflection within the retreat so that there was space. They really could step back and if they get overwhelmed and step back to reflect on things. And so we built that and we closed it with a loving kindness meditation and a closing circle where students shared experiences and their own reflections on the retreat.
So we're going to walk you through some of the research that we found, excerpts from the journals that have been previously mentioned, which we've used. And Lata can describe a little bit more about how we designed this research.
Yeah, thank you, Carter. So we used mostly qualitative data, as Carter had mentioned before. Each student had given like 7 journals, like 6 weekly ones and 1 cumulative. And so we used that. And we also used the online discussions. That was for every week, there were 2 questions. And every student was required to respond a comment on each question. But also they were required to respond to at least one other classmates, their peers' comments. And because we wanted to make sure that they're talking to each other. And and so that was the kind of data that we used. And we did do some very preliminary kind of rudimentary statistics, which is like we counted instances of online discussions between students from different disciplines. But we used primarily grounded theory to do an open coding, which is like we read the data as a whole and started identifying passages that for us illustrated some of the moments of interdisciplinary learning, so we can develop a little bit of an understanding and a process framework on how interdisciplinary learning evolves. And also, if we could crystallize some of the key pedagogical design aspects that could be implemented in teaching by other faculty. And so now we want to show you some of the examples of student journal entries.
Yeah, so the following quotes here emerge from the student submitted journal entries and really just represent a small example of how the themes resonated with the students outside of those disciplinary silos. In this example, an undergraduate psychology student reflects on the value of empathy in a design process. Their realization of the importance of empathy came from interacting with classmates in the discussion boards. So we see value in the ability of a non-design student, in this case, to see the need for empathy through lectures and practices related to the design process.
And so this example is a non-design student who's a clinical psychologist who is responding to the design module. where they use the design module and the mindfulness aspects in design to explore and reintegrate their own therapy practice to move from a kind of a short-term symptom-focused problem-solving approach to challenging fundamentally how we think and act and what are our mental models.
And in this example, an undergraduate fashion student reveals how practices related to compassion impacted the way they thought about their work as a designer. In particular, from this excerpt, we see how the themes related to social and environmental justice, which were framed as non-design in this context, helped the students see how having compassion for others could be incorporated into their design practice.
So, we came up with this preliminary process model of how interdisciplinary collaboration or interdisciplinary learning evolves. And then, so we find that developing mastery over your own discipline does not have to come at the cost of interdisciplinary work, and vice versa. And so mindfulness can be used to develop mastery in their own, each person's disciplinary identity and disciplinary knowledge, but that also can be helpful in transcending disciplinary egocentrism and being open to other viewpoints and exercises. And I think once you go through both is when you can actually get to a developing an integrative understanding, which is the interdisciplinary process. And at this point, this is a preliminary model based on our research. And we are looking forward to digging deeper and fleshing this model out further and identifying very specific implementable kind of ideas and exercises and practices for other faculty to adopt this.
So thank you so much for letting us share this work with you through this video presentation. It's only the beginning of what we see as a larger project at the New School, where we hope to create a graduate minor around this topic and a larger kind of infrastructure that supports faculty, staff, and students through mindfulness. We're also looking at and thinking about the different ways that we can, because of the what we've learned from the online teaching, the different ways that we might be able to create content modules that could be implemented into different curricula as well as different classes and things like that. So this all comes as a larger project that has been supported by the New School, and we look forward to hearing questions and thoughts that you may have.
Thank you very much for your time and attention.